Ladies and gentlemen, I got to see Armored Core 6 gameplay. This was during Play Days. Bandai Namco showed up and had a behind closed doors presentation of this very highly anticipated title. You guys know me, I'm a big Metal Gear fan, in part because the mechs are so freaking cool. And right here we got a game from FromSoft dedicated to mechs, a love letter to mechs. And man, it's looking pretty freaking good so far. So let me detail what I saw in this presentation. So far, so impressive. So first, they began by just kind of talking about the development philosophies surrounding this game. They want smoothness of controls. They want the reactions to input and actions to feel precise. They want mechs to be fully customizable, and they want players to be able to engage with expansive dynamic maps filled with situations that grant a sense of progression, originality, and ingenuity. And they want the combat and the action itself to be challenging. They want the battle design to force players to strategize, especially when it comes to building their mechs and then how to approach situations. They highlighted three core design pillars. Number one, massive and three-dimensional level design. Number two, tactical combat system further expanded by parts assembly. And number three, satisfaction of overcoming difficult challenges, which is a staple of FromSoft. And especially like with the bosses, you know, you can tell that these are not going to be a cakewalk. They are really aggressive with just physical melee attacks as well as the projectiles that they shoot at you. We got a glimpse of that in the trailer itself. And so it's going to take a lot of paying attention, focusing fast reflexes, understanding the enemy pattern, and designing your mech appropriately to be able to tackle specific enemy types and missions. And so the FromSoft DNA in that sense is very much still there. And even if you're not fighting bosses, you're going to come across situations where you're going to be fighting multiple enemies, groups of enemies, and they are all going to be pretty aggressive. And so you have to know what their strengths and weaknesses are, plan accordingly, survey the area and see where these enemies are positioned and what kinds of enemies you're facing off against, and make sure that you have some kind of plan in mind before engaging. Otherwise, you probably get wrecked. The footage that I got to see wasn't actually just footage. It was a developer playing the game. In fact, there were some things that happened that weren't planned for. When the dev faced off against the final boss, he actually died, and that wasn't supposed to happen. I talked to somebody else who watched the demo, and they reported that the player actually beat the boss that time. And so they showed actual gameplay. It wasn't just like pre-recorded footage. We couldn't get our hands on it, but the gameplay did look legitimate. And then before we delved into the gameplay itself, they did show us some footage of some of the environments that we'll be seeing in this game. And man, the environments in this game look mesmerizing and beautiful. You got desert areas, ravaged landscapes. Then you got like snow-filled areas with like frozen dams. You've got these big vertical tunnels that would be traversing through. You've got these expansive areas with lots of cliffs. You've got industrial areas where everything feels very like rusty and mechanized. And the scale of all of these areas just looked huge. But beyond that, just the design of them, just the aesthetic and artistry of how these levels look, really looked mighty impressive. And FromSoft has become very good at that. They know how to make breathtaking vistas. They have done it with fantasy, and now they're doing it with the sci-fi setting, and man, they're doing it. So yeah, that was kind of the setup for the demo, and then we actually got to see the developer play the game. It began with this mission briefing, and that involved this sleek interface where there was this big screen in the middle and then a bunch of little screens on the side, and you would see different visuals as the briefing was going on. On the big screen, they would highlight, whatever they were talking about in terms of the main mission objective and where to go and what your target is. And the interface had this, it reminded me of Cyberpunk combined with that MGS4 codec kind of visual aesthetic. And while the big center screen showed some stuff and the little screens were kind of moving around as the briefing was going on, we're getting details about this arms dealer group called RAD. The briefing was done by this character or AI, I don't know, called Ayer or Ayer. It's AYRE. And the designation of the player is Raven, and that was hinted at in the trailer. I believe that's just who you are, who you play as in this game. You are Raven. And after getting briefed about my target location and my mission objective, the game transitioned into this launch sequence for the mech that was very Evangelion. The mech got on top of this platform that just like shot the mech up and propelled him and trampolined him upwards, and the mech boosted himself towards the destination. It was this like in-game cutscene that faded out and then transitioned into the gameplay proper. And man, the visuals on this, while it's not the most advanced in terms of graphics fidelity, especially it being a cross-generation game, this is easily the best Armored Core has ever looked. And I've always believed that art style and overall artistic aesthetic are more important than pure graphics fidelity. Elden Ring certainly proved that. And with Armored Core 6, while it's not the most technically advanced in terms of graphics, it still just looks gorgeous, and there's enough visual fidelity there where like the mechs do come to life, the environments do look incredible, and all of the visuals just kind of melt together into something that looks really appealing and compelling. Transitioning into gameplay, we're taken to this big area sort of in the sky, this giant industrial factory-like setting that's kind of floating in the air, or that is built so far high up like a skyscraper that below all you see is clouds. And the player began by showcasing the mobility of the mech. All of the different boosters on the mech allowed for complete three-dimensional movement, horizontal, vertical. And if you want to boost yourself, there's this big old stamina meter essentially at the very bottom that shows you how much boost you have. But generally, yeah, moving the mech around just looked very smooth, and it was easy to scale buildings and walls and get on top of certain perches to survey the area. The main mission in this demo was for Raven to reach the center of Grid 086's lower level, and there was a main quest marker indicating where to go. And then along the way, the player encountered their first enemy mech, and we got to see just how fluid the combat looked and just how awesome these mechs look when they engage in battle. You've got homing rockets flying on both sides. You see the player just kind of dashing around, dodging the enemy rockets, and then engaging in melee, dodging back out, and then engaging with the machine guns. And it was just this like dance, all while engaging in that smooth and fast-paced three-dimensional mobility where you're moving horizontally and vertically, really taking advantage of just how much room there is for you to move around in. And there was this really cool moment where one of the enemy mechs was on the edge of the platform, and the player boosted and rammed the enemy and just sent him flying into the precipice below. From there, it was on to the next area. There was this big gate that the player had to hack, but as the hack was happening, the player was ambushed by more mechs. This time there were these like rolling mechs with shields on the side, and so there are things like that that you must observe, because if you attack them from the side, the shields will defend them, so you want to make sure you attack them smack in the center and gauge their attack patterns. These enemies can also go into like roly-poly mode and like charge at you and stuff like that. The variety of attack patterns from enemies will definitely keep you on your toes, and that's definitely a classic FromSoft thing that has applied in the Soulsborne games. But this developer is very good at this game, so easily dispatches all of these enemies. He did lose some health along the way, so he uses one of his 3 repairs. Now he has 2 left. After opening and getting through the hacked gates, the mech eventually jumps into this sort of tight interior space that's very industrial feeling, and there's some scaffolding below. And below is also an enemy that hasn't detected the player, and so you can take advantage of that to kind of sneak attack them and quickly dispatch enemies. After taking care of the unaware enemy, the developer showcased the quick 180-degree turn, kind of like how in Resident Evil or The Last of Us, you press like down in a button and the character does an immediate 180. There's a version of that in Armored Core as well. And turning around led to this hallway space where there were more enemies. The player engaged with his beam sword. There were more of those like roly-poly enemies with a shield on the side. The player brings up the energy shield and takes advantage of the mech's mobility to like dash behind the enemy and engage with melee that way. But even this experienced developer is taking damage along the way because of all the different armaments and attack types that enemies have. So the player decided to use yet another repair, leaving leaving one repair left. And then the player used this scan feature to essentially wall hack and see what's beyond this point and scan the area for enemies and tag them so that he could come up with a strategy on how to tackle this next area. The player then went in there, locked on to enemies, and moving while being locked on, just really smooth. And because the camera is sort of zoomed back out, you can see a lot of what's going on around you. And so the combat, while very fast-paced and maybe even disorienting looking for novices, you know, it feels like once you get the hang of it, it just really flows very smoothly. Like the lock-on didn't look janky or anything. The camera seemed to be able to keep up with the speed of the mechs and all of the chaos happening around. After taking care of enemies here, there was this other gate that the player hacked that led to an exterior environment once again. And there was just more mobility elements that were shown off, just how much verticality there are in these levels. There was actually another one of those like trampoline jump off points here. This time, instead of launching the mech into a mission, it launched the player mech into a higher level in this map. In this next area that's really high up, the player decided to perch themselves up this wall and look at what's below. And there was this group of enemies, and the developer emphasized how it's very important to observe where these enemies are located, the kinds of enemies that are there, plan a strategy out, and just kind of really take in the information before engaging. And that way you have some kind of plan of attack instead of just rushing in there blindly and letting yourself be overwhelmed. From there, the developer once again showed off more combat in this battle arena with these groups of enemies. Usage of shields, mobility, machine guns, boost, dash, aerial mobility, just all of that just flowed so beautifully together. The combat looked very visceral and very fast-paced. Like, it's definitely a very different beast from the combat that you might be used to in Soulsborne, where even the fastest combat in those games are relatively slow compared to this Armored Core experience. Now, within this group of enemies was this tougher mech, which had spider-like legs, was a little bigger, tougher, more health. Despite the developer's best effort in this attempt, the developer was actually defeated, and from there the death menu came up where the player could choose between restarting from the last checkpoint, restarting the mission altogether, quitting the mission, entering assembly right there and then. Once again, this is not a Soulsborne game where the whole point is to try to survive until the next checkpoint, until the next bonfire. Checkpoints are pretty generous in this game. It's more about going from scenario to scenario and experimenting, planning right there and then what to do about this particular circumstance. And so this developer immediately went into the assembly that was accessible in that menu and started tweaking the mech, knowing that he was going to need something different to tackle this particular group of enemies, and that bigger enemy with the 4 legs and the more sort of tougher armaments to deal with. And I mean, this assembly menu, good Lord, there was a lot to take in. I couldn't write everything down, but I mean, you can change out just about every facet of this mech, from arms to legs to its core to the head to the different weapons that the mech holds on each arm or that are mounted on the shoulders. The level of customizability here, utterly insane, like simply unparalleled. You can design a mech that looks like it's straight out of Zone of the Enders, or one that looks more like it's from Metal Gear, or one that's more like a Gundam or more from Evangelion. Like, the possibilities here just look damn near limitless in terms of both appearance and just the combinations and permutations of the different pieces and elements that you can put together to create something that suits your play style. And all of that happened in what looked like a much more expansive version of that loadout screen you see in MGS5, where like Snake is on the side, and then you go through all of these different menus and you can see Snake's equipment change live. And that's kind of what you see here in the assembly garage, where you got the mech's model, and as you start tweaking with all of the different elements that you're switching in and out and changing, you can see the mech changing live. And so you're both seeing the aesthetic changes that you're making as you're reassembling your mech, and also the statistical ones. In this scenario, the developer decided to switch out some of the weapons, gave the mech a new single-shot rifle where each shot is more powerful, albeit obviously slower rate of fire. And the developer also changed out the legs to something that looks more animalistic, those legs with that like double jointed kind of look. After assembling the mech, the player decided to restart from the last checkpoint, and the game generously took the developer right before that big elevator boost that takes the mech into the area with that group of enemies where the developer was slain by the tougher enemy, the tougher mech with the 4 legs. But now with this setup, the developer managed to dispatch this group with a single fire rifle that allowed for more precision while also doing more damage. There's a stagger meter that was building up on top of that tougher enemy's head. While trying to fill that meter up, the enemy was attacking pretty aggressively, doing these big jump attacks. The player dodged out of the way and attacked with melee and guns, and eventually, as the player kept relenting, that bar filled up completely. That stagger bar was represented in the form of this like subtle half circle that would fill up, and then once it got to a certain point, it would turn red and the enemy just kind of toppled over. And with the enemy staggered, the player went in there and just went ham on the enemy and finished it off. And it was a victory well earned. It was a combination of assessing the situation, backing out, reassembling the mech, and just like changing up the strategy on the fly. And that's what this game emphasizes. When a mech build clicks for a certain battle scenario that you struggled with, that's where the satisfaction is supposed to come out of this game, and that's what the developers were trying to demonstrate. The player then proceeded further into this giant level. Along the way, there was this like almost like this giant fridge-looking device that just kind of flew in with boosters and landed next to the player. That was essentially this supply drop where interacting with it would see the player refill their ammo and all of their resources. Right on time too, because the next scenario from there was a boss battle, this machine called the RDD-24 Smart Cleaner, which you can see right here in the latest trailer of Armored Core. It's this giant mech tank with like big Popeye forearms that are filled with saw blades. There's this volcano-like geyser that explodes, almost like this turtle shell that is a volcano geyser. It erupts with fireballs. The legs look like these giant deadly floor polishers. And you can see just the sheer scale of this one boss. And if you looked at the latest trailer, like this is nowhere near the biggest boss you'll face in this game. But this guy right here, yeah, no, he definitely put up a fight. The erupting fireballs would keep the player on his toes, turn mobility into like a bullet hell scenario with lobbed fireball projectiles to avoid. This boss also had some big attacks with a lot of mobility, like this ram maneuver, or it would occasionally like jump up in epic monstrous fashion and swing at the player with the giant Popeye forearms. I also saw it do this big like clap attack with its arms to try to smash the player mech. These boss encounters definitely do maintain the FromSoft DNA when it comes to those tough, challenging battles, where the enemies just seem like insurmountable with how big they are and how just insane some of their attacks are. But through trial and error, and in the case of Armored Core 6, through strategic assembly of your mech, these challenges can be overcome, and that's when we get that sense of hell frickin' yes, I overcame. Even though Armored Core 6 is not structured like a Soulsborne game, when it comes to that sense of overcoming great challenges, like that is something that FromSoft is maintaining, and making enemies seem so grand and so overwhelming compared to what you have, and making you really fear them and making you work for every victory so that when you do achieve it, you feel like you've overcome, like truly overcome a great challenge through your own skills and through your own ingenuity. That's still there. And the flavor of these bosses and the way they attack you, their aggression, and just how overwhelming they feel when they charge at you and all that stuff. Like these bosses do feel like FromSoft bosses. Now the developer was supposed to win this battle, but because this was live gameplay, anything could happen. And in this playthrough, in this demo, the developer just happened to get careless and died from the RDD-24 Smart Cleaner's relentless attacks. And the developer's like, whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen. But you get the idea, and that's when the demo wrapped. We didn't get to see the developer beat this boss, but we got shown plenty. That was when the demo was supposed to cut off anyway. So yeah, after that, I mean, a big round of applause, and I was just there, excited for the day that I'll finally be able to get my hands on this game and experience just how much Armored Core has evolved now that FromSoft has gained so much more experience as game developers through their highly successful Soulsborne series. It just feels like a lot of refinements and extrapolation on a formula that Armored Core fans will welcome back with open arms. It honestly looks really awesome. It looks really fun. But this was just one mission. It's always safe to beware of getting too hyped about something, even if it comes from a beloved company, because this is ultimately just a preview and just a vertical slice of the overall experience. So far, though, man, it's looking like this game will likely succeed in many areas. So far, it's looking like this game has a lot of potential to be an ultimate mech game if it plays as good as it looked. Given FromSoft's recent track record, they've just been releasing one banger after another. I'd be hard-pressed to think that this is going to be a big flop. I'm really optimistic about this one, but let's wait until media outlets are able to report back on their experiences come August. But until then, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Armored Core 6 based on what you've seen so far. Generally, there seems to be a lot of excitement surrounding this title, and hopefully that excitement will be lived up to by the game. But share your thoughts on this impressions video and all of the marketing material we've seen surrounding Armored Core in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.